born January 17th, 1964 in New West. My nickname for years has been Herbie. I was 5 years old, and my dad had put my brother is almost 6 years older than me, so he'd put my brother in lacrosse. Not sure how, because my dad didn't have a lacrosse background when we were young, but my brother seemed to enjoy the game, so when I came time for me, I think I was 5, and my dad put me in, entered me into lacrosse. I grew up playing hockey and lacrosse for the most part. At one point when I was younger, I thought that I might be able to. I was a decent hockey player, but then as you get older and you realize that speed wasn't the best, I wasn't the fastest guy out there, that probably wouldn't have made it in hockey. I think I was actually, when I was younger, I think I was a better hockey player than I was a lacrosse player. It hasn't changed now, I don't think. If you're not playing for a winter club where you're on the ice every day, it's hard to keep up. And playing on a city team, in New West like we did, you're not on the ice very much, so you're not skating as much. So it got to a certain point where you kind of make a decision. And in my case, I realized at a certain age, okay, well, let's work a little harder at lacrosse and concentrate more on that, and that's what I did. There was a lot of us that played together, and we had successful teams when we were younger. It was fun, but it also, it was a hard physical sport, and it taught you about teamwork and conditioning and stuff at an early age, and through your adolescent years and stuff. So I think it, as I said, whether it's lacrosse or any other sport, I recommend all kids be in sports, but obviously lacrosse is my favorite. When we were young, living close to Queen's Park, there was basically 3 places we could practice. Terry Owen was my next door neighbor, who was a very good player, and he was 4 years older than me. And we had a baseball diamond out in front of our place at Terry Hughes Park, and we weren't allowed to throw the ball against the apartments because they made too much noise with lacrosse balls. So there was a box where they held the bases and stuff in, and we were allowed to throw the ball against that out in the park. So I'd hear Terry out there sometimes, or I'd be out there, we'd be banging, and you're hitting one spot on that thing. Other than that, we walked up to Moody Park, which was probably a 10-block walk for us, or on days where they let us in the Queen's Park, which they did a lot more when we got a little older to practice. We went to the box all the time, and we constantly practiced on, whatever we were doing. In Tony Malcolm's case, he practiced breakaways. There was not much need for me to practice breakaways. I get about 1 every 2 seasons, so didn't have a lot of speed. But yeah, it was just repetitive practice, and luckily, like I said, growing up in New West, as you know, lacrosse is pretty much religion in New West, and so a lot of our friends played, and that's what we did all the time, and we practiced. I mean, the same way there's pickup hockey games, we used to do pickup lacrosse games in the backyard. We'd grab a couple nets and get a bunch of us together and play. So that really helped and wanted you to get better, and it was fun. Well, I lived on 7th Avenue, and very close by in the apartments that we lived in, Terry William lived there, and Troy Dixon, who played later up through junior in New West, I think, lived in the same complex Terry did, and we were 1 over from them. And then up the street, a couple of guys that were so-so lacrosse players, maybe a bit above average. Paul Purnell lived on the corner. This was on 7th Avenue. And Wayne Goss was just a few houses up on the other side of the street. Well, obviously, Paul Purnell was really good, but Paul was obviously several years older than Wayne, so I didn't see Paul as much. I saw him, more towards the end of his career, and of course saw Wayne Goss a lot. And Wayne, obviously, he could do it all: face-offs, short man, it was amazing. I mean, he seems small now, but he wasn't that small back then, I guess, because the generations, they grow. But just everything that he did on the floor was unbelievable. So, being a New West kid, obviously Wayne Goss was your favorite player. I liked watching Al Luthwaite and many others on that team back then. But he was the guy that hard not to watch him. And then later years, Brian Tasker was on that team. He was pretty good. Jordy Dean, who I believe is 4 years older than me, watched him play. And Jordy was another guy that, he could do everything: defense, offense, transition, and just an all-around really, really good player. My wife is Debbie Heard, and she grew up in the Kootenays but was born in Surrey. I'd remind her of that repeatedly. And She used to work many years in the brokerage industry downtown, but the last, I think 4 years ago, she started working for the BCLA, which is how I got into the Hall of Fame. She counted the votes. Yeah, so she's heavily involved in lacrosse. Before she started doing lacrosse for a living, she was already heavily involved because my son's played his whole life, and so she was involved in his lacrosse as a manager. She's been involved in Burnaby minor lacrosse, helping out because we've lived in Burnaby for so many years. So herself and Susan Kirkby have basically ran Burnaby minor for quite a few years. She's also crazy enough to get involved in our Masters lacrosse and helps to run our Masters League. And so lacrosse, as you can see, is in our family. And my son is now at the junior age and is trying out for junior A in Burnaby this year. Junior, we had a lot of good players. You know, Ben Hilges was a year older than me, so he was on that team. I played with him for a couple of years. Brad Henry and Dale Robertson and guys that played on previously played like for Surrey and stuff like that came to play for us in New West. We had a very strong team. Went to 2 Minto Cups. In '83, we played a round robin with Peterborough and Etobicoke. That was when Adam Oates was on Etobicoke. He showed me that I was a rookie. He came over top of me from our own end, stripped me, or from their end, stripped me, went over top, went down our breakaway. Thankfully, our goalie bailed me out, and I said, okay, he's got a pretty good jump because I wasn't short. Note to self, don't let him do that again. But that was a good experience for us because we weren't expected to go to the Minto Cup that year because Burnaby was favored. And funny enough, I think the very first game we played that year, Bob Salt and Jack Fulton Jr. were our coaches, and we were down 8-0 after the first period, our first game, Queen's Park Arena. We all thought Salty was going to go crazy on us, and comes in the dressing room, he's casual, it's like, oh well, it's like it's first period, you know, we'll be better and come back, and amazingly enough, we came back and won that game. And but it was a strong team. The next year, we hosted the Minto Cup and lost to a very strong Whitby team that had Joe Noondag on it. He was their team captain. He was a phenomenal player too. I think he scored like 83 goals that year or something. But unfortunately, the next year we didn't make it to the Minto. But strong team, lots of friendships for life from those guys, so good times. In our junior class in New West, the year we graduated, they made an expansion team that year out of Richmond because they said it was the strongest draft in quite a few years. So they gave Richmond the top 10 picks in the draft that year for Senior A. And that team stayed there 3 years, I think, or maybe 4, and then we moved to Burnaby. So the Burnaby franchise now was Richmond. So ended up playing with a lot of guys, Jamie Stewart, Stu Watson, Troy Pelzer, and then later on Steve Goodwin and Tony Malcolm, and a bunch of us that all played together, all played Senior A together too. '86 was the first year, and we actually had on that team, Dale Robertson played, Troy Pelzer played, Stu Watson played, Jamie Stewart played, a bunch of those guys, Bruce Davidson we picked up as a free agent, quite a few guys from junior in New West, and then obviously guys from other teams like Dan Lamond and Donnie McNeil and some guys like that in the early days there. Everyone thought that we were going to be a really strong team, but what they don't realize is when a team gets the top 10 picks in the draft, they're picking mainly talent, and as you know with any team, whether it's hockey, lacrosse, or whatever sport, you need a mix of players. You need the guys, you know, could do the, you know, a lot of defensive things. So it took us a few years really to get the depth before we could challenge, and it wasn't until after we moved to Burnaby, I think it was probably from 1990 to probably 1993, for 4 years there. I think we went to the Western Finals 3 out of the 4 years then, but that was the best we did. The closest we got was double overtime in Coquitlam in Game 7 to go to a Minto Cup where we lost. It's funny, you know, when you grow up and you play your whole life in New West, you only envision yourself playing for New West. And our first exhibition game in Senior A, who we were playing New West. And the very first pass I made of the game, I almost passed it to a New West player. I think it was Todd Lorenz, because you're just used to passing to guys in Bellies jerseys. But yeah, you miss not playing for the team. The only thing that made it easier was because the guys that I got drafted with, that we played with in New West, that were, you know, your friends, made it easier for the drive out to Richmond and stuff like that. And at some point, in the back of your head, you think, you know, would you play for that team someday? For sure, I would have. But it wasn't until the end of my career where I said to Paul Robotham, our GM at the time, because we hadn't been competitive for a few years at that point. The team kind of started out low. We kind of went up, and a lot of that coincided when we lost Dallas Alec as our goalie, because he was an unbelievable goalie. And so we kind of were going down that way and hadn't made the playoffs. So I told Paul, I said, I'm near the end of my career. I said, if it looks like mathematically we're not going to make the playoffs, can you trade me to a team that's going to be in the playoffs? And I didn't say which one. I would have been fine going to New West. And actually, Victoria had inquired, but I didn't enjoy the flights over to Victoria going 3 times a year. I certainly didn't want to go over twice a week. So I told them thanks, but no thanks. And I ended up getting traded to North Shore Indians. And at that time, because they were in Senior A, unfortunately, after the season was over, they still owed Burnaby future considerations. And at that time, they'd used up a lot of their draft picks, so they didn't have any draft picks left. So I got back to Burnaby's property, and then they in turn turned around and traded Dan Stroop and myself to Coquitlam, which is where I played the last 2 years of my Senior A career. Well, not really funny, but I retired after the 2000 season, and Coquitlam won the Mann Cup in 2001. And many people said to me, oh, you should have played one more year. And the people that know me believe me when I say this, is that I said no. I said I would have loved to win a Mann Cup, but I didn't want to be a guy that won a Mann Cup just by hanging on to play to win a Mann Cup. I wanted to be a big part of that team winning the Mann Cup. And at the time when I retired in 2000, I was having shoulder issues, back issues, knee issues, and I don't want to sound like a whiner, but I just thought, okay, there's a certain point in your career where you realize that you're not going to get better the next year. I think when you're playing lacrosse, you need to always believe that you can get better the next year and get better the next year. And there's a certain point where you realize you've reached that, and then you're going back down the other direction. And for me, that's the way I felt about the way I was playing. I couldn't play well enough to what my own expectations were. And so I realized at that time it was time to retire. I mean, and it's the same in any sport. Once you have a little bit of success, then you're going to draw the better defenders, and you're going to get the double teams and stuff. So it's just something that you have to deal with. But yeah, especially back in the wood stick days, I think I penciled in and on the calendar when Andy Ogilvy switched from the wood to the Tupperware, because he used to swing the stick pretty good, and it was obviously a great defender for New West for many years before going to the Adanacs. And I told him later, I said, I enjoyed playing with you a lot better than against you. So there was a lot of injuries. Most of the fingers and thumbs on the hands got broken back then, and I think I've injured both ankles, both knees, both shoulders, pretty much everything you can. So, but those are just things you put up with, and you try and minimize it. But at the end of your career, they kind of take their toll on you a little bit on the body when you're trying to get into top condition. Well, I played 1 year in a team that most people probably haven't heard of, the Charlotte Cobras. Unfortunately, they were an expansion team, and they only lasted 1 year. And probably a week before I was set to leave, I injured my right shoulder quite severely. Had already made arrangements to go down there, so couldn't really tell the team, and I wasn't of much use to them. It was only a 10-game season, and had a tough time down there. A couple years later, ended up calling Johnny Meridian after getting a call from Dan Stroop about playing for the Ontario Raiders, which was the team that was in Hamilton for 1 year, and then was later bought out the following season and became the Toronto Rock. So I ended up playing for about 2.5 more seasons then, but unfortunately, like I said, that was the end of my career, and getting a little long on the tooth for NLL, especially for a guy that wasn't a real speedster. It was great to, especially being a Canadian, you still love to win the Mann Cup, and as we talked about that, it didn't happen. So having a chance to win the NLL Championship was a lot of fun, and it was a great group that they put together in Toronto, and Jimmy Veltman, Colin Doyle, and Pat Coyle, and and Dan Stroop, Chris Gill, a lot of good Eastern players that we had on our team too. Bobby Watson in goal. It was a lot of fun to play on the team. Very, very high lacrosse IQ on that team that we played on. You know, especially after playing here, like I said, in Burnaby, where we struggled for a bit. I had a chance to go to Coquitlam at the end of my career in the senior A, where we had a little more success, not getting to the Man Cup, but more success. And then playing in Toronto was a lot of fun, and getting that championship was nice. I'd like to say I remember the exact amount we got paid back then, but my last year was 2,000, and I've had a few concussions. So, but no, I think when I last played, I think the most I made was our last season. I want to say 750 US per game. But yeah, I was around for the transition in the game, the modern NLL, and I was also around from when it changed from the wood to the plastic. I was actually one of the first ones using the plastic, and not by choice. We were playing against New West one game, and the game before I'd broken my only wood stick, and then the next game I broke my hand going to the boards, and I remember being called a name because I went off afterwards by the New West bench because they were calling me a derogatory name. Not that happens in lacrosse, and but I knew I couldn't take the loose ball because I'd broken my hand, and so from that point on I could only practice with what we called then a field lacrosse stick, which is just a regular lacrosse stick now. Well, once you get used to those, you're not going back to the wood stick. So I was out for a month with a broken hand, and when I came back, I just kept on using it. And I think at that time there was only 2 of us in the league using it. But once all the young guys kept coming up from junior and stuff, they were all using it, and there was more kids playing field. And then eventually everyone started using it. Well, being an offensive guy, it's a lot lighter. I mean, first when we switched over, it was still with a wood shaft, not the light shafts they have nowadays. But even with the wood shaft, it was a lot lighter because the head of the stick, as you know, is quite heavy. So to be able to move that stick around as an old guy, to be able to grab a ball this way and move back and forth was a lot easier. And then once you went with the even lighter shaft, it's like probably, you know, I would say at least 1/5 of the weight of what an old stick was. So as an offensive player, a lot easier to move around quickly than to have especially when you compare it to the clubs some of the D guys used to have, with the multiple layers of fiberglass that somehow kept on getting on there, getting bigger for the D guys to hit you with. But no, it was a lot easier playing with those sticks once you got used to them. When I stopped playing professional lacrosse and senior A lacrosse in 2000, I was like a deer in the headlights because the 2 guys that were coaching Burnaby Senior A, Rob Dick and Scott Swartz, both asked me if I was interested in helping out the senior A's in Burnaby. And I thought, well, at that time I lived about 3 blocks from the arena, and they just want help, maybe power play, that type of thing. So I made the mistake of saying okay. And a couple months later, Rob Dick stepped down from being a coach without telling me. Next thing you know, before being this guy that's going to go down and help out in the power play, I'm a co-coach and then eventually a head coach in Burnaby. So I did that for many years. Also started coaching my son after he played a few years. They didn't have a lot of coaching at that level, so I agreed to do it when he was young, and so I was doing quite a few years of double duty. I walked away from the senior A's. Sheldon Pellador took over, and figured the team was in good hands, and I could take a break from coaching for a little bit, at least at the higher level, and just concentrate on the minors. That didn't last long because I talked to Steve Goodwin and himself and Jamie Stewart and Darren London were coaching the intermediates in New Westminister, asked if I wanted to help out there, and I agreed because I figured it wouldn't take too much time. Of course, coaching doesn't take a lot of time, right? So ended up doing that. We had good success. We won the provincials that year, and then we were asked by the senior A's to take over coaching the senior A team. And it was a big decision to make because I'd already done the senior A's, but we agreed as a group to do it. And I think we did 5 years with the Salmonbellies. And then last year I took what I thought was going to be a year off, and my son was playing Junior B1 in Burnaby. And seeing as how he wasn't driving yet, and I was at all the games and practices, I volunteered to help. So the second half of the season last year, I helped out coaching there too. And then this year they asked me to be the Junior A coach, and I've accepted that role. You know, it's good. It's rewarding. You know, and I say this not to knock coaching senior A. I think at the younger level, there's more that you can teach kids because once they've got to the senior A and pro level, they're already pretty good. So you're not going to teach them as much, but at the same time, it's still rewarding. And like you said, your coaching guys are playing pro. They play for a bunch of different teams in the NL or, you know, and previously in the WLA. So most of them, for the most part, know what they're doing. It's just kind of getting them all to work together on what the team wants to do, the team concepts, and just in our case, you know, especially with coaching with Steve, conditioning has always been a big thing, and making sure our teams are in shape. And you're just more at that level, you're fine-tuning the things that are being done. And because, like I said, most of these guys, they're playing for NLL teams already, and they have power play plays they like to do. They have plays they like to do and stuff. And I've always been one of, it doesn't need to be my idea to be a good idea. Like, you're constantly learning when you're playing the game of lacrosse, and you're constantly learning when you're coaching the game of lacrosse. So you're always learning something new. I like going to the NL games now. We've got season tickets for the Warrior games, and I'm constantly watching to see what they're doing on a power play, a 6-on-5 play, how they're breaking out of their zone. Just those little things that you need to pay attention to and basically implement those when you're coaching. I was also involved in the transition from like you said, playing conventional to playing offense-defense. And I can't tell you how many people that I talk to that say, you know, offense-defense is ruining the game. And I'm always curious. I say, tell me how it's ruining the game. Oh, there's no transition in the game. And my argument is always, what did we do in the old days? We would go out there and play offense, then we play defense, then we come off. I said, where's the transition there? And I said, there's still transition in the game today, depending on who's coaching. If you have a coach that doesn't want guys going down the floor, and there's an invisible line at center, and a shock buzzer will go off if they go over center, which some coaches coach that way, I said, then there's no transition. But a lot of coaches, a lot of good coaches, coach transition, so they still have guys going down the floor, even though they might be defenders. They got guys, sometimes designated transition guys, to make sure they're going down the floor. So transition in the game hasn't changed. It's depending on who's coaching the game, on how they're playing it. I can tell you without a doubt that because I played through the transition from conventional to offense defense, that every team that I played on where we switched from one to the other, we were a better team. In Burnaby, we switched to offense defense, and we were immediately a better team. Getting guys to concentrate on certain areas and picking out their strong points, it really helped. And so we did that in Burnaby. We also did that in Coquitlam when I was there from the last 2 years, and we switched to offense defense because we did play some without, and we were a far better team. And the team where we're in Toronto, we started in Hamilton, and when we first were there, we played conventional, and then we switched over to offense defense, and it was night and day. For the people that are the naysayers, if you happen to play at the time I did, where you played through both, I can tell you without any doubt that every team that I played on, we were better when we played that way. But that being said, all the teams I played on, the coaches bleed very much in transition. When we were in Toronto, we expected to score 4 to 6 goals a game in transition. That was part of our offense, so which makes a big difference. And then, like I said, there's some coaches that don't believe in transition, which I don't understand, but you know, you're taking away a lot of chances for some strong offense. We played the first night. I think it was our first game of the season. It was Thursday night, and we were short some players, and I think we had some injuries, right-handers and guys that weren't back, NL and stuff like that yet. And so we're sitting there, and Steve Goodwin says to me, he says, "Don't you need one more game for 400 in the WLA?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "But don't be crazy." I said, "You know," I said, "Let's figure things out," because he was going through the schedule, and I think the junior A teams and a lot of the senior B teams played the next night. I think it was Friday night, and I'm going, okay, well, exhaust all avenues. Like, that's not a good idea. And I'd happened to sign a card with in senior B that year. So I said to him, I said, well, I couldn't because the team I play for has a game that night anyway. So I said I couldn't play. We went through all these. After he told me, he says, I can't possibly find anybody. I need you to play. And so we went through all these hoops and barrels, and one of the things was if I'd played the game and I hadn't gotten the Hall of Fame yet, I would have had to wait another 5 years. So we didn't know because it was a time when they did the vote, we didn't know if I was in or not. So we had to get a hold of Dave Evans. And Dave Evans goes, "Oh yeah, sorry, I was trying to get a hold of you. We did the vote already. You can play as many games as you want." It's like, oh damn. So we passed that one. I said, "I don't have a helmet." He goes, "That's taken care of." I came up with 3 more other excuses, and they were all fixed. North Shore gave me the release that day and did everything it took to get in there. They had my name bar on, had a helmet all ready to go and stuff. And I said to Steve Goodwin that afternoon, I said, "Okay, I know we've figured all these things out. Everything's in place that I can play." I said, "I still don't think we want a 52-year-old out there on the floor." He goes, "Forget it, you're playing." He says, "You're playing." So I went over there and you know, in the back of your mind, because I actually played when I was 46, I played for Langley. Jerry Van Beek asked me to play, and I played a couple games that year, an exhibition game and a real game. And that was 10 years after the last time I'd played Senior A. And so this was another 6 years later. And so in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, okay, I know I can play Masters still, but I'm not sure I can run around with these young guys. And I get out there and warm up, and I'm doing the pick and rolls and the warm-up drills and stuff like that. And I'm thinking, maybe I can pull this off. And I trust me, I limited my time on the floor and played the game as if I was a coach more than a player, because I refused to try to go to goal and make myself look silly or lose the ball and hurt the team. But I got to admit afterwards, it was a lot of fun being out there, just to see how the game's played. Still, as you say, every year the game changes and the guys get younger and faster and stuff, and it was fun. And the cool thing was my son had already planned to come over on that trip with us, and it was his birthday at that time, so that was kind of cool too. You know what? I think if I hadn't been still playing Masters lacrosse, and not that it's the same speed, and still have my stick in my hands all the time, and of course being out there with those guys in practice and throwing the ball around with them, I think I would have been a little more worried. But the game hasn't changed. The game, the players can come along, and there's a lot of talented players. And so when I say the game hasn't changed, it has changed. The players every year get younger, faster, and quicker and stuff. But the fact that I'm playing offense, defense, that's one area where, because it's specialized, you're not running the whole floor. You can get away with being older. And I'm saying this only for a game, not for a season, because I wouldn't recommend doing any more than one game. But you can get away with giving yourself short shifts, getting out there for short sprints on and off the floor. But if I was to try and run the whole floor with those guys the way we had to in the old days, I don't think I would have agreed to it.